and water for our regularly scheduled meeting of today is Thursday, April 17th. We have present myself, we have Charles Savage, we have Peter Lisa, we have Paul Kay, we have Sandra Roberts, we have Lucas Steffen, we have Marshall Wilcox, we have Jake Kulowick, and is Anna coming tonight or is she not?
She is not.
She's not, okay. Okay, so that is it. So we will see, let's see, who sat last time as the alternate?
I sat last
All
time.
right, so Marshall, we will seat you as the alternate, okay? All right, so moving on to old business, application 25-003, the Old Saybrook Auto Mall application to conduct a regulated activity at 225 to 95 Middlesex Turnpike, map 52, lots 1, 2, and 3. Applicant owner, Old Saybrook Auto Mall, agent Joe Wren. We are considering an act, however. I understand from Chris Costa that we have an update on that.
Yes, so we received an email from Joe Wren saying that he had another meeting this evening and a conflict. He said that if the board is on board with his outline, that was the one that was emailed earlier this week, he will update the plan and resubmit for the May meeting. As the agent for the applicant of the subject property, the applicant requests an extension of the statutory timeframe to continue the application to the next regular meeting of May 15th.
Okay, so in light of the request from the applicant, I will move that we continue the matter until the May meeting.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Hearing none. We're going to move on to public hearings. 25-001, 91 Sheffield LLC, application to conduct a regulated activity at 91 Sheffield Street, map 49, lot 2, placement of fill within an inland wetland, construction of a site access driveway cul-de-sac, sidewalk, single-family residence, attached garage, in-ground pool, and a pertinent driveway, building utility services and wastewater system. The applicant owner of 91 Sheffield LLC, attorney Marjorie Shansky is the agent. We're to open public hearing and continue or close by 5/15/2025, no later than 5/21/2025. And
I recuse.
and Liz Steffen will be recusing herself from this. So I will open the public hearing and let the applicant go first.
Thank you. Never comfortable sitting, but I'll sit so that we're all at the
You
same.
may do it when it's yours, the well is yours, do with what you please.
Thank you very much. Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the Inland Wetlands Agency. I'm attorney Marjorie Shansky. I represent 91 Sheffield LLC. I'm here this evening with my soil scientist, our soil scientist, George Logan from REMA Environmental Services, and also with Michael Ott from Summerhill Engineers and Landscaping and Engineering and Landscaping. And I sent a letter a few days ago to the commission. And I brought additional copies in case you didn't have it before you. I want to make clear that most of the addenda to the letter were matters already in the record in this case. So that was not new material to the commission, but I thought in the interest of convenience to the commission that it would be auspicious to have the documents to which reference was made right at your fingertips. So that's the genesis.
This would be the letter of April 15th, 2025.
That is correct.
Okay, yeah, that is in our packets and online.
Okay, because I did bring additional copies if anybody needs one to make notes on. And I also want to say that the basis for sending the letter was to consolidate the various aspects of our conversation this evening and effectively at least be the beginning of your note taking and relieve you of having to do note taking, because a lot of what I'm going to say you'll find is expressed in the letter.
Okay.
So it's a record of what I'm talking about, and and
I
perhaps
have it.
annotated in a way that gives you both regulatory and judicial references supporting and evidence items that support. Sorry. I just came from teaching the last two classes of the semester at Quinnipiac Law School, so I've been talking all that.
Does anyone need a copy of that letter? I have mine online. Do you have one? Jeff? Does anyone need a copy of the letter? So we have one. Paul, you need a copy. Anyone else? We have two copies of the letter. Oh, you have one? From the April 15th? Oh, okay. So we just need one copy of the letter for.
The extras are right there.
Oh, okay. Very good. Thank you.
So the request is to fill the single isolated wetland on the property. And the discussion in my letter talks about the years of study that my client and its experts have spent evaluating and learning about this property. It is a 10-acre property. 5 acres of it are burdened by tidal wetlands and setbacks of the tidal setback variety and the gateway conservation setback. And with that array of environmental constraints, all of the proposed development is in the upland. We are honoring and observing each of those setbacks. And I included in my package an existing conditions map, which shows in blue what those setbacks look like, and and in your plan set that also exists. So if at some point you'd like Mr. Ott to walk you through that, he is here for that purpose. As we discussed with the commission at the last meeting, this is a first step in a sequence of regulatory steps that this application has to take to come to fruition. The site is currently zoned marine industrial, but in December of 2023, or in November of 2023, with an effective date, December 1st, 2023, the zoning commission approved a regulation amendment adopting a planned development district that's eligible to be landed in the marine industrial district. And I can talk more about that if you had curiosity about it. It's certainly not a wetlands issue, but this is the first in a number of steps that are required to get to the development itself. And when it was approved by the zoning commission effective December 2023, it had been positively recommended by the planning commission as an amendment to the old Saybrook zoning regulations, and you'll find that regulation at section 36. Now, the prior owners of 91 Sheffield Street had a coastal engineering, oceanographic studies and consulting business at that site dating back to 1978 till around 2010. And though the parcel fronts on the North Cove, that business was not a water dependent use. I'm told that when they went out to be on the water, that they loaded their boat on a trailer and went to someplace else to embark on that. The parcel was on and off the market from 2010 forward. And I think, although it's sort of speculation, that the environmental constraints and the unusability of such a great portion of the property impeded its movement on the market. We are, as I say, confining our proposed development only to the upland area, with the only intrusion beyond it for the public access component, the proposed public access component, which is a path down to a proposed kayak launch for the public, walking trails through the 5 acres of the tidal wetlands area, and a dock for the future residents of the proposed homes. There is not currently public access to this parcel, so that will be an amenity that is in service of the town as well as satisfying one of DEEP's most dearly held, obligations associated with waterfront uses. So, as my letter says on page 2, I've appended all of those documents to this letter. And the only one, I believe, that was not already in your possession was the site suitability analysis dated October 19th, 2022, prepared by Keith Nielsen, a professional engineer at DACO Inc. The basis of that letter, which has been rooting around in our efforts since their inception, is to describe the attributes of the North Cove as it meets the water, the limitations of the receiving waters, the absence of navigability because of how shallow the waters there are, and in support of, frankly, the zone change, but also to further inform our study of the property. And the other letter that may not have been in your possession until last week, I guess, is the mitigation supplement that George Logan from REMA had submitted. But otherwise, these documents provide the historic, ecological, and biological information about the subject property and about the isolated wetland that is the subject of this application. I then have excerpts from Mr. Logan's letter, which I'm not going to belabor because Mr. Logan is here and can speak for himself. But he writes in a descriptive and supportive way about the characteristics of the low-functioning wetland that is the isolated wetland. And he proposed this mitigation of the creation of a wetland in a more desirable, advantageous location on the parcel that will be a higher functioning and therefore more advantageous wetland as it is established. I then referred to Mr. Brogy's letter of March 6th, 2025, and Mr. Brogy is here as well, so I'm not going to speak for him. But he agreed with many, and yet, where I go, he agreed with many of the characterizations that were found in Mr. Logan's letter. And I interrupt myself to say that Mr. Logan also agreed with the observations that are contained in Eric Davison from Davison Environmental observations that were contained in the vernal pool survey, which was provided back in October 2024, and the invasive plant species inventory dated October 22nd, 2024. So we are starting to have some agreement by the experts as to the condition of what we're looking at and as to the appropriateness of the mitigation that's being proposed. So Mr. Brogy wrote his letter, and the mitigation supplement provided by Mr. Logan is his response to Mr. Brogy's comments and his alteration or amendment or adjustment to the proposed wetland mitigation to match Mr. Brogy's comments. Then in my letter on page 4, I include a brief discussion about feasible and prudent alternatives, primarily to establish that the regulations, the definition in your regulations is consistent with the with state law, and that the idea of mitigation is also a factor that is available to be considered in the issuance of a permit under Connecticut General Statutes 22A 41 sub A sub 4. The mitigation measures to be considered in issuing a permit include measures to prevent or minimize pollution or environmental damage, maintain or enhance existing environmental quality, or in the following order of priority: restore, enhance, and create productive wetland or watercourse resources. So we have a place in the law for the activity that we're proposing this evening. And because of the limitations, the entire sort of description that I've provided in this letter, and as we're discussing right now, and as Mr. Logan will further discuss, the cumulative circumstances that create the development envelope on this parcel as we are proposing it represents the feasible and alternative for its development. The And then I spend some more time talking about the legislative goals of the Inland Wetlands Act, which of course have protection of the wetlands at their base, but are very forward in discussing that there needs to be a reconciliation of development and preservation. That it isn't a zero-sum game for either preservation or for development, because at the beginning and end of the day, we're talking about private property. So the chapter, the Wetlands Act, creates a balancing test, reconciling protection of the environment and the need for economic development. I want to say a word about our economic development in these 5 homes that are proposed. We, through the course of the hearing with the zoning commission, heard comments about the desirability of including an affordable unit among the 5 units, and I amended the PDD regulation at that time to include an affordability component, and the proposed development includes an affordable unit. So from an economic perspective, and in view of the housing crisis that exists in the state of Connecticut on all scales, not just affordable housing, this is an opportunity on 10 acres of land to introduce 5 dwelling units, one of which is affordable, and including the public access component on land that never had that latitude before. And then on page 5 of my letter, and I don't say this to supplant my interest in your reading my letter, because I'm just sort of highlighting it, and would offer that it contains more than I'm sharing with you. I cite to the case of Red Hill Coalition versus Conservation Commission of the town of Glastonbury, which recognized the legality of a mitigation in exchange for the filling of a wetland. And we have, the court said, and this is the Connecticut Supreme Court, in our case law, we have recognized that, quote, it is important to remember that against the laudable state policy of the Wetlands Act must be balanced the interests of a private landowner who wishes to make productive use of his wetland. So in sum, my letter is here to tell you the factual background of the property, the study of the property that has taken place by a team of qualified experts, giving rise to the proposed development as presented. And with that, I would pass my position on to George Logan to discuss the meat of the evening, which is the wetland and the wetland mitigation, unless you have some questions at this time.
I don't think how we want to do this. Do we want to, okay, we can go, sure, we have,
Clarification.
sure, we'll allow, what, sure, we can go question by question as they present it. And then we'll get
I
public
missed
answer
a word, I apologize, when you were saying the 2 docks that are out to the cove, are both public, or is one private and one, I missed a word, you said the second one was what? The longer one?
So the public access kayak launch is for the public at large, and the other dock is for the owners of the houses on the
Thank you.
property.
I missed the word owner.
Yeah.
Which unit is he from?
It's one of the ones on
No, which
Sheffield.
one?
I don't have a site plan in front of me, since that's not really, it's beyond the 100 foot review area.
No, it isn't unit 5.
Pardon me?
It isn't unit 5.
It's not unit 5.
Okay, all right.
Any other
Yeah,
questions?
one
Sure, go ahead.
maybe silly question. Why not just construct 4 houses, get rid of the 5th, and the problem goes away, and the wetland stays intact?
It doesn't go away because 4 houses with an affordable unit are not economically viable, because it is a large parcel of land with a lot of development constraints and a lot of costs associated with the development and the public access component. It becomes infeasible at that point.
What do you mean by infeasible?
It doesn't work financially.
How so?
Well, I don't have the numbers in front of me, and I'll be happy to.
It's just that you're saying that, that making a statement that becomes infeasible, like a little, we hear that a lot. That something's infeasible, that a proposal's infeasible, it's not economically infeasible. I'd like some teeth behind the statement.
I will get you some teeth.
Thank you.
But I would also say that it's a 10-acre parcel
Mhm.
where 5 acres is already just being conceded to be setback.
I understand. I'm sorry, Peter, I didn't mean to cut you off.
That's okay.
Any other questions for Attorney Shansky before we move on to Mr. Logan? The public, don't worry, we will hear from you. I will allow everyone the opportunity to speak. What we're going to try to do is move through the applicants so that they can have all their presentations with some questions from the committee as they come up. We'll then hear from the town's experts and hear what they have to say. And then having heard all of that, then we will have the applicant, we'll give the public the opportunity to have their comment, and we will give the applicant the option to either wait until hearing all of the public comments to address a concern, or to address the concerns one by one, whichever the applicant chooses. I leave them their option. Does that sound fair?
It sounds fair. It had been suggested to me and, it's early in the evening, but, it had been suggested to me that this hearing is going to be continued.
Won't know until later, but there's a likelihood that it would be continued. That's certainly a possibility.
Because some of the correspondence that came in this afternoon was after I was already in the
Sure.
classroom, so I haven't even seen it,
Sure,
much less been able
I think
to
that's fair,
respond
and,
to it.
and what I always want to do in these public hearings, is to give everyone the opportunity to be heard, and then to give the applicant the full availability to intelligently respond to any comments that come up. So of course, certainly, we're not going to hold your feet to the fire for things that you just observed today, and there may be members of the public who are hearing new things today and wish to process that. So there is a very high likelihood that the.
Thank you.
So thank you, Attorney Shansky. Mr. Logan,
Yes.
floor is yours.
Oh, sorry.
Good evening, everyone. So my name is George Logan. I'm a principal environmental scientist with Green Ecological Services. I have one copy of my professional resume, but just to give you a little something of who I am. So I've been a wetlands soils consultant now for going 37, almost 38 years. I have a master's degree in natural resources science, the conservation biology and wildlife. And I hold certain certifications as a soil scientist. You have to in this state, right, to do this kind of work. I'm a professional wetland scientist. I'm social wildlife biologist, and also a certified senior ecologist through the Ecological Society of America. Actually, it's great to be before you. I haven't been before this commission since I was hired by the Fund for the Environment to fight the preserve. I don't know if any of you were on that. That was a long time ago, and then we were successful, so that was great. So what I like to do today is I'm not going to read chapter and verse from the reports. I'm just going to highlight a few things, and I'm sure you have questions that maybe are more beneficial doing it that way. So there's a couple of reports that you've already had in your possession. One was back on December 29th, and that was a wetlands assessment and mitigation. And what I did there is basically I told you I was the guy that went out and delineated the wetlands by soil type. And then I characterized the regulated wetland so that because you're obviously the regulations say I should, and it's always a good idea. Obviously I was there in late in the season, in the fall. But I have seen the site a couple of times since that time, including about a half hour ago. Which was nice. And so what we have here is a small isolated wetlands, about 2,600 square feet. Its origin is unclear. Some have postulated that maybe it was man-made. I'm not convinced that that's the case. I think it's probably something that our glaciers left behind. Probably a big block of ice that kind of melted and left the depression. But I can't tell you that for sure. In my report, I have a 1965 aerial photograph, which I also will give you here. Love that.
We're gonna just split it.
Split it, okay. Here we go. I probably gave it too many. And I'm also gonna pass the 1970 aerial photograph. And again, I'm gonna try to split it. And finally, a 2004 aerial photograph. Now, the 65 I already have in the report. The other two are, I guess, oops, I guess I should keep them. So the 65. It's, thank you. It's clear enough. So what I've done there is I pointed to the isolated wetlands. So you have an idea roughly where it is. And I think if you squint, now I've been doing remote sensing since college years, so I kind of have an idea what I'm looking at, but so let me explain it. What you see there, I'm not sure, the 65 was probably done in the early spring, so there's still some ice that's sitting on that top of the little isolated wetland. And you see there is some trees around it, but it's kind of open in the northwest direction. So that's the 1965. If you go to the 1970, which is a little more grainy, you still see a little ice there, a little smaller, give you a general idea. And then finally, the 2004 obviously had a lot more growth around the wetland. This is a much nicer photograph, resolution wise. It's an orthophoto, and it shows the establishment at that time, how the site was used. So this wetland was obviously delineated by me, but it's also looked by my good colleague Eric Davidson from Davidson Environmental. And he looked at it for the purpose of determining whether we had a vernal pool habitat. And he determined that that was not the case. And I believed him, but I needed to check myself, so I kind of poked along today. I mean, there was no amphibian activity whatsoever. There was about 6 inches to 8 inches of water sitting there. I checked the charts, the tide charts, and your high tide is around 3 o'clock. And that's about 2.5 to 2.6 at Saybrook Point. So I'm postulating, and I think I'm probably right, that there is a little bit of an influence of the tides here. That doesn't mean it's tidal in the fact that it's not saline, it's fresh water. But, you know, you have groundwater going down towards the marshes. And so when you have a high tide, it pushes the water up and it kind of lets it mound. The bottom of this isolated wetland, you think it's about 1.7 to 1.5 elevation. So if you have a tide that's a 2.5, this is the low tide. I mean, the high tide of the two, the other one's higher than the one previously. And it takes a little while to respond to the wetland that's a little further away. So I think what you see here is that the water level in this wetland is influenced by the tides to some degree. What degree, I don't know. I would have to study more, and I guess that's not what I'm here for. But I just wanted to let you know that that's the case. And the reason I'm saying that is because we're going to try to do something similar where we're mitigating. So let me give you a little bit of information on this wetland. So we have poorly drained soils for the most part, possibly even very poorly drained, depending on how you look at it. So if we either a Walpole or Scarborough, from a soil series perspective. And then in my first report, and you can see that what I usually do is I have what I call a wetland delineation characterization form, and I give you the skinny on what I saw. So for instance, I told you that the wetland hydrology, this is my opinion, is seasonally flooded, seasonally saturated, probably at the edges, but there's probably a portion of the wetland that's saturated, which means every time. And I think, I'm guessing that's because of the influence of the tide, and as we know, that's probably gonna get a little worse because we have rising sea levels, right? So I give you information and I give you an understanding of what vegetation is there on the strata, trees, shrubs and herbs and mosses. Not a wide variety of species. I also looked at what Mr. Davison had also put in his report, so maybe a couple of the species are from his report here. I didn't specifically see him because he was there at a better time of the year. I could add periwinkle, so today. Oh, I did have it. Cool. I wasn't that crazy. Give you an idea of the wildlife I saw at that time. And that's just a snapshot, obviously. And of course, we all know that we have an eagle's nest not too far away, even though that's not a wetlands issue. Everyone knows about it, so it's not something we're obviously trying to hide. So, the bottom line was that, yes, this is a wetland that's probably been there for a long time. It's small, it's not highly functioning. And as far as its vegetation is concerned, it's nothing to write home about. Actually, there are no trees that are growing within the wetland itself, they're just outside, which maybe speaks to the fact that it's saturated because you couldn't get germination of the tree in the wetland. There's some shrubs again along the side. There's not much that's happening within the bulk of the wetland, say about 80% of it, which is the area that's seasonally allowed to saturated. Other invasive species involved, and obviously there's a big report on that for the entire wetland. I think was put in by Mr. Davidson's company, also by the Bartlett Tree study that also identified certain invasives. And one of the things that has happened there is, and you probably saw it if you've been out in the field, there used to be a Norway spruce that died and has fallen right into the wetland. You can't even enter the wetland very easily. So there's a lot of woody debris within the wetland itself. So low functionality, usually if I have something that's of high functionality and someone comes to me and says, we want to replicate it, I'm like, go knock on someone else's door. I'm not going to do that. But in this particular case, I felt comfortable that I could create a wetland that's equal and or better. And I will emphasize the better and I'll tell you why. In another spot on the site, which is far away from any proposed development, which is nicely nestled closer to the marsh. So there's that juxtaposition with another habitat. And in an area which, by just doing that, we're getting rid of invasives. And one of my favorite species, just being facetious, mugwort. So I produced in the original report a wetland, but I didn't go down far. I went to about elevation 4.5 or so. And I didn't want to dig a humongous hole and get all the way down to elevation 2, say. Because it would be a big hole. And it would basically spread out. So that was the initial plan, and then Mr. Broggie got involved and he kind of looked at it and said, you know, George, the best thing to do, as you know, because right now, George, what you do proposing is a liner, and I've done this before. Where you put a clay liner or a silky clay loam liner. And you can have a perch water table, and your regional water table could be 3, 4, 5, 10 feet below, and it really doesn't matter. But he was right in saying that it's always best that you tap into something that you know is there to work, and that's the groundwater regime. I'm like, yeah, okay. So we went and did the second reiteration, and I'm going to pass this, and I'm just showing you a snapshot of the actual grading, if you will, that we're proposing. Oops, I guess I'm going to. And this is at the far western corner of the site. So if you're looking at this map, north is up, kind of, you can only see the arrow there, kind of truncated. And that fence that you see, the little X's, that's the fence, and you have the cemetery on the other side. So then, and there's obviously some trees that line that area and a fence. So we have an area that's not, I drove through the cemetery, I saw two people there, very nice and quiet. I love cemeteries, but that's just me. And so it's nestled in a corner, in the quiet corner, if you will, of the site. And so here, what you see originally, and if you squint a little bit, you'll see TP1, TP2, TP3, and TP4. These are test pits. 1 and 2 were the original ones where I kind of, we dug down like I can't get into groundwater, so let's do the perched situation. And then Mr. Brody suggested another course of action. So then I went back and I did TP3 and TP4. And what I saw there at the time, and I was a few hours past, I think past high tide at that time, that I had on TP3, which is the one further to the west, groundwater level at, 7 feet below surface. And then the other one, 8.75 feet below surface. So groundwater is there, but it's deep, right? And then I saw modeling, strong modeling, 1.5 feet above the TP3. So, above, so closer to the surface, and then 1.25 above the groundwater. And you can see it from the modeling bands, prominent modeling. I'm not just looking at. So there's obviously up and down that happens also there in the groundwater. Now, one thing that I've said in the report, and I think it's still true, is that we're still kind of in a moderate drought. We haven't recovered yet. So what I'm seeing here is groundwater that's lower, and so I have to inform myself from the strong modeling, that striation you see, and I have photographs that I also included in this. And so what we have here is we're going down to 3.5 feet. Okay, so you say, well, George, wait a minute. If I'm reading this correctly, your groundwater is not going to get up more than 2.25 or 2.5. So why are you going to 3.5? And so, well, that's a good question, and that's one that Martin asked, and I'm sure he's going to comment on it. And the reason that I did that is because I didn't want to have grades that were more than 6:1 going down to this isolated wetland that I'm trying to create. So gentler slopes, better for planting and habitat, etc. And plus a safety thing, if we want to consider that. And I didn't want to keep going just for the heck of it to include additional land or further to the east. So that's where I ended up. And what I proposed is to use an old thing that we all kind of realize is if your water level is coming, say, to 2.5 and I'm a foot above it, if I put a 15 inches of topsoil that's loam, so it has some fines, and has, say, 12% or so of organic matter by weight, loss of ignition, you have wicking that happens. So whenever the groundwater hits that bottom layer of the topsoil, it wicks it up all the way to the top. So you would have a seasonally flooded, but probably not as much flooding as you see in the wetland that we're taking, and then seasonally saturated and saturated hydrologic regime through the growing season. And then I got a question from Martin. He says, George, under existing conditions, the little wetland that's out there that you're taking, albeit not highly functioning, and he'll speak to that, has a little water at times, so that's a good source of water for animals. I'm like, yeah, you're right. So could you possibly do me a solid and go down so that I can have, say, 6-7 inches of water? And I said, that is very much something that we can do. So we can depress this in a spot, an additional 1.5 foot, and we will have the same thing that we have in the existing wetland, the rising and falling of the water, and create a water source. Now, caveat, I've been doing wetland mitigation, wetland restoration for better part of the 38 years. So I have tons of experience. I've learned a lot of things from my mistakes. And the typical mistake that people do early in their career is to make a wetland too wet. So I don't want to make a wetland too wet. But I do want to make a wetland to have a hydrologic regime so we can support wetland plants. And the other thing that I'm doing here, and I know that some people say, well, you know, the little wetland that you're taking away has some trees around it, but you're doing something slightly different. Okay, maybe you can have an equilibrium, an equal type of water regime. But what of the fact that you're not planting trees around this, you're having some trees and you're having some shrubs and you're having some other things. And the reason for that is because if you read the literature, including the ones that the state puts out, it will tell you, for instance, under the Connecticut Wildlife Action Plan, shrubland wildlife significantly benefit from the increase of old field habitat that reached its peak circa 1870, when less than 30% of the state was forested. Since that time, there had been a steady decline of shrubland habitat as old fields succeeded the forest and former farms are converted to residential and commercial developments. The occurrence of natural disturbances are not sufficient to maintain or create enough shrubland to support those GCN species identified with this habitat. As a result, anthropogenic methods are used to augment the creation of natural shrublands. And I would add that to also similar language exists there for meadows. You're losing the meadows. If you don't maintain a meadow, I'll back up. There are some meadows that are self-sustaining, and those are the really wetlands. And the ones that have certain species that exclude the red maples coming in and basically we turn into a red maple swamp, which is kind of your climax community of wetlands in Connecticut. So what we always try to do is to diversify and have trees, because obviously those are important, but also have a mosaic of meadow and shrubs. And so that's what I'm doing here. And by doing this, by having now two complementary wetland cover types, you're increasing the functionality of the wetland. And of course, the diversity of vegetation that we're proposing is much higher, by an order of magnitude, than the one that exists in the wetland. So in the back of that report, I redid my tables. I actually now have more species because we have a larger area. And I am responsible for, if you look at this little plan, for up to elevation roughly 5.5. You're like, why only to there? Well, because there's just an amazing, robust landscaping plan that was done by a licensed landscape architect. That I'm not sure it's been put into the record, but it has been, oh, there it is, right there. It's been amended because of my little thing, my little exercise. So what has happened is that I've asked the landscape architect to let this fertile soil wetland scientist do my thing up to elevation 5.5, and then they can do whatever else they need to do with native species above that. And so there's a little dovetail. So that's one of the benefits, if you will, that augment this area and make it a much more diverse in functioning wetland habitat. And in my report, I said, I listed 5 positive attributes of the created wetland that contributes to the assessment that this is going to have a much higher ecological integrity and functionality than the one we're taking. 1, similar hydrologic regimes. That means a hydrological equivalency is attained with Martin's little additional sump, if you will, to have a water source. A much higher vegetative diversity in all strata. A much more favorable wetland cover types, which I just mentioned. Much more favorable landscape position, tucked away from development and favorably juxtaposed to the tidal wetlands. Nearly immediate functionality upon plan implementation, and we're going to question that, and I'll explain it in a moment. And also dovetails what I was just talking about with a robust landscaping plan that includes removal of invasive plant species. Now, nearly immediate functionality upon plan implementation. Yes. It's been my experience that within one growing season, and I'm talking here mostly in the herbaceous component, because it's open and the shrubs haven't grown and provided shade. And because we do a few little things with some fertilizer, we use milligranite, I'm not sure if you're familiar with milligranite. That's an organic fertilizer, which is also deterrent to deer, very important here. They don't like the smell of it. And I could tell you why, but I think I would have to go R-rated, so I don't want to go, so I'll stay PG. Ask me later. So we fertilize, we have amendments, sort of amendments to the topsoil, we have the good topsoil. What typically happens within the first season, you have this booming of greenery and everything grows amazingly. So you have immediate functionality. Maybe the shrubs and the trees are not there yet. But you know, the butterflies and the invertebrates and the lepidoptera and you know, the animals and don't care, they like it. So they're there. And of course, there's a diversity. So again, my conclusion is that, and I'll answer any questions that you may have. Because I know there's a lot of information in the rows that I haven't covered, including detailed implementation and monitoring and how many years that's going to be, et cetera. But my conclusion is that the creation of this wetland will more than offset the taking of the small wetland on the site. And even though it's just slightly larger, its functionality will be much greater than what is being taken. And that's my professional opinion. And I'd be happy to open it to any questions that you may have at this time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a couple of questions. In terms of high functioning and low functioning. We've heard a fair amount from you about the sort of the functions that you hope to achieve with the new wetlands that you're planning to create. But essentially the pitch is that we're going to get rid of this low functioning wetland and we're going to manufacture a high functioning wetland elsewhere on the site. What makes the existing wetland low functioning? Why is it classified as such on its own merits, not relative to the, not relative to the one you're proposing,
Right.
but on its own? What makes us look at this and say, well, this is a low functioning wetland?
Correct. So I could, and maybe if you want me to do that the next time if we continue.
Sure.
What I could do is.
Yeah, I'll say, for any questions that I ask, that anyone in the commission asks, a perfectly fine answer is, I'll get back to you.
Right.
With something that's totally fine.
I can tell you in general categories.
Sure.
But my thinking is that maybe what I could do is there's one of the, there's a methodology that we all use, all wetland soil scientists use in Connecticut, which is called the descriptive approach, is the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers functions and values approach. And it has rationales for each one. So for wildlife habitat, it has a whole bunch of rationales. You run through them and you check boxes and write things. And by doing that exercise, even though I didn't do it for this because I have a tremendous amount of experience in looking at wetlands and going, okay, that's a great wetland. We've got to stay away from that. And this is not so much. But then generally, you have a plethora of invasive species here. Low the diversity of vegetation. The herbaceous stratum is barely there. I mean, there's a little ring around the edges. Shrubs are, again, invasive and not very diverse. You have an American holly. It's about the nicest species that I saw. And again, you have, and I'm not knocking the fact that there's all kinds of debris and things in there because that's habitat elements too. But the overall, if you look at aesthetics, we're allowed to look at aesthetics. That's a value. So functions, you probably know this, functions are what are intrinsic to the actual wetland that we're looking at. And it doesn't matter whether we're there or not. And values is what society and we as humans derive from it. So aesthetics, recreation, those education, those are things. So what I can do for you the next time is run through the rationales and show you where we are. And the way that the descriptive works, it doesn't give a low, high, a medium or medium high or anything like that. What they do is they say, This is a principal function, so it's there and above average, it's higher. And that's a secondary function, or it's present, so it's a little on the low side, or it's absent. So here I would say, for instance, flood floor alteration. It ain't there because there's no opportunity for that value actually to benefit anyone. No one's getting flooded out right next to the door, so I will do that, because I think that would be a better way to kind of visualize.
Thank you.
Why the case might be.
Appreciate that.
Yes.
The other question that I have for you is regarding, two other questions. One is the proposed substitute wetland, is, I imagine, and you touched on this a little bit, it's gonna take some time to get up to speed. What is the plan if, and I understand that we all, you know, everything's a plan and you hope to engineer it work a certain way, you can do the best you can, you hope that it's going to work that way. However, it doesn't always work.
Well, yeah, I've had a few of those.
How long would it take for us to recognize that perhaps it's not functioning the way we wanted it to? We're not seeing this high function that we hoped it would. About how long will the jury be out on this? And then what's the plan if it's not looking the way that we want it to?
All right, so that's a good question, and I can tell you horror stories where I've created this beautiful wetland, 1.5 acres in Suffield, Connecticut. And I was Army Corps of Engineers land data, so I had to do, you know, my monitoring and my performance standards and so on, plots and pictures. And the developer went belly up. So it's like, but it still worked, but it didn't work as well as I'd like to, right? And I actually looked at it recently. So in my experience, the 3 to 4 year is the critical time that things mature. So as you probably saw from my notes, the first year I call the implementation year. Depends on when we're doing it, so I don't count that. So obviously, if I'm doing it in the spring, and then I'll be looking at also during the rest of the growing season, I'll be looking in the fall before the end of season, see if everything's going well. Might propose some remediation, some remedial actions, and then first year twice, second year twice, third year twice. At the end of the third year, what the notes say is that I have the ability as the wetland scientist or whoever might do my job because I'm in some little tropical island retired. Yeah, I wish. Would follow the guidelines and say, okay, we haven't met the performance standards. That's the performance standards are the important one. Now, I haven't put performance standards in there. So I will do that. And the reason I'm saying that is because I just had a conversation with someone from the USCPA, and they reminded me that the Army Corps has performance standards. And they're simple things like 90% full vegetative coverage at the end of year, whatever. Less than 5% invasive species by such and such a year. Those are performance standards. So I will add those. And so in my experience, if you do that, the 2 to 3 year is minimum. So usually I go to 4, based on my experience, and have the ability to go another year. And then you go year to year. I'm doing one in Wallingford now, which is on the 8th year. We had 6 year and then COVID hit and we missed a couple of things. And so we had to go back and redo some things. And the town kept our feet to the fire. So, okay. It's a tractor supply center in Wallingford. I think. So yeah, that's.
And so what do you do if along these years, you realize you're not hitting your benchmarks, you're not hitting performance standards? What sort of action do you take to improve the situation?
Well, so
How feasible is it to, if it's failing after 5 years, or not meeting standards after 5 years, what does that tell us? And then what are our options?
yeah, so there are categories of failure. We're not meeting our performance standards. But one of the most critical one is we did meet our hydrology or we met it too much. It's too wet or it's too dry. So you might have to redo a few things. You know, bring some soil in or take some soil out. And reseed and replant. That's one category. The other category is you planted 35 different species and 5 are doing great and the rest are kick the bucket. Well, then you have to go in and do something about that. And then the third category, these are major categories. And there's others too, is invasive species. You know, these darn birds, they sit there and they poop Asiatic bittersweet all day long. And then you have a problem. Now, one thing that I noticed here was critical, and I might be wrong, but I think I read somewhere that we're not allowed to use herbicides, spot treatments in this zone. I have to figure that out if that's true or not. Because herbicides are sometimes critical for some invasive species. I mean, if you look at the guidance that the Connecticut Invasive Plant Working Group has given for certain species, you're advised to use certain formulations. Not me, I don't have a license for that, but you have to have a licensed person. Unless it's my own problem. So that's one thing I need to figure out. Other than that, we're gonna be a lot of mechanical removal. So invasive species probably is the most critical in my mind. So I did a wetland up in Enfield lately, last year. On creation, this was a perch one. And I noticed that there were a couple of sprouts of Japanese knotweed. I called a landscaper, I said, there's some Japanese knotweed there, you go dig them out and get rid of them. He didn't do it. And now I'm dealing with a little mini infestation. So those are the kinds of things that can go wrong. So as long as we're on top of it and we don't miss, you know, those critical times to go out and do certain things. But yeah, so what happens usually is some wetland mitigation is quick, it's easy. Vegetation takes off, invasives are not there, the hydrology is perfect. You look at it a few times like, okay, the trajectory is right. So just the same way that our little wetland that we might be taking out if we get a permit for that has reached an equilibrium, whatever that is, even though I'm calling it low functioning. No one's out there doing anything about it. It's just doing what it's doing. Same thing, if you watch it and make sure you're on the right trajectory, and then at some point you hands off and it will do what nature will do. But you gotta nurse it. You gotta foster it to that point. And that's a critical thing.
Those are my questions at this time. Any other commission members have questions? Mr. Lowe?
Yes, sir.
So it's 3 years, maybe you come back and for 4 years, I'm sorry, 4 years. Who's paying for that? Who's paying you to do that? That's part of the developer's contract with you.
Yeah, I can't specifically ask, but someone is gonna have to pay for it
I'm
because,
asking, how would that work? Cause
yeah,
that seems to me
for me
important
typically,
that it be maintained.
for instance, to give you one, example. Where, the initial developer hired me to do the mitigation and to get it implemented, but I have to do extra monitoring. The developer now has given it over to, association, homeowners association. Who's paying me? The homeowners association or the developer? Well, in this particular case, the developer had put some money aside. And so for those years, he was responsible, because I gave him a figure, it says it's gonna be X amount of thousands of dollars. He put it aside, it was either an escrow, whatever you wanna call it. That's not my language, I think.
So, I mean, the question is that type of, will there be a contract between you and the developer
I think typically what happens is that.
in this case? I mean, this.
We haven't
particular
gotten to
project.
that point, but typically that's what happens. Typically, if the commission is gonna give approval for that, they're gonna have to say, okay, what's your performance bond? There has to be a performance bond.
Yeah.
right? And then, which is going to include the implementation and the maintenance and monitoring for those 4 years. And if it has to go another year.
Can I ask for a answer?
Okay.
Where you've located the replacement wetland is within the gateway 100-foot setback and the state's 50-foot wetland setback. What's your opinion? How do you think this, you're gonna have to go to the state for a permit to do this, right?
I'm not sure.
Well, the question is how is the state gonna react to that?
I'm not sure.
Building a freshwater wetland within a tidal zone, tidal setback zones. It's a question I have. I don't know what the answer is either.
Maybe our legal expert has an opinion.
So it's not, it's a 50-foot tidal wetland zoning setback.
That's
from
zoning
the
setback.
state.
And gateway is 100.
Gateway is 100.
All right.
So you want to go to state, but you will have to go to zoning and to gateway. So instead of
It's a zoning.
swap out state for zoning and gateway, and the same
Got it.
question, the same question applies, though, right?
All right.
A bit above my pay grade it is.
So Jay, do you want, if you,
That's all I needed to hear.
well, if the applicant has an answer to the question, then they can answer it. But I don't know if they do now have it perceived previously.
We got the zoning.
Get the zoning and gateway.
Yeah.
Any more questions from you?
There may be, hold on.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry.
One more,
Hold on, I think Attorney Chansky is going to try to address Jay's question.
I think it'll emerge in the coastal site plan exercise at zoning.
That's zoning, okay, which is delegated to the town.
Right.
Got it, okay.
Well,
Yes, ma'am.
I'd just like to confirm the suggested new location is proximate to a cemetery.
Yes.
So there would be no effect upon the cemetery grounds, as anyone.
No, there wouldn't be. As a matter of fact, we're in a lower topographic position than the cemetery.
Right, it's better, I just wanted to absolutely confirm that.
As a matter of fact, we're within the flood zone. And so is the wetland that we're taking.
relative to that. And this question might betray my own ignorance here, but within the flood zone, is the new location approximately as flood prone as the old location? Or is that impossible to say?
About the same.
About the
Well,
same.
it's actually closer to the title, but as far as elevation, if you look at the elevations, so the critical elevation here will be 7. Because that's the crest.
Mhm.
And if you go back and look at the other wetland, I think it might be 8.
Okay.
Something like that.
Any other questions at this time for Mr. Logan? Any questions online for Mr. Logan? I don't see any.
You're taking questions from,
Oh, no, sorry, no, not from the public yet, sorry, or just from the commission, just take that back, okay. Anyone else from the applicant?
Not unless you have questions, Mr. Chairman, and it might be auspicious here from Mr. Berkey.
Mr. Rogan?
Hello, good evening. I'm not necessarily sure that I have questions. I was on the site today and I took my groundwater monitoring meter out to the site, and there are 2 standpipes that are located within the proposed wetland mitigation area. And I noted that the depth of groundwater at the up gradient standpipe, which is closer to the cemetery, north of the existing northern building, was around 8.6 feet below grade. And then there was another standpipe, a shorter standpipe north of the northern edge of the proposed mitigation area, and that was around 5.8 feet below grade. It was a little muddy. There wasn't any water in it, but it was definitely wet soil at the bottom, which sort of informs me that at least today. And given the tidal cycle was just coming off of low tide, we were around zero in terms of depth to groundwater. Um, and the proposed mitigation area, the bottom of it is around 3.5 feet. So that's above where we would have standing water today at that time. And although the existing wetland on the site, um, has limited wetland functions and values. Again, I was over there today, and there are pine trees falling across it, and there are oh, there's no wetland herbaceous material there, and limited shrubs. But it does have a freshwater source for wildlife, which seems to be the primary function of that wetland. And so um, my comment has been all along to try and intercept the water table with a wetland mitigation area. And there seems to be enough room to move things to the south to perhaps bench and create an open water area within that wetland. And the existing plan at 3.5 feet at the bottom doesn't quite seem to meet that, unless I'm missing something, and I'm open to comments. So that's really my primary um, uh, comment, tonight on the wetland mitigation plan. The herbaceous plants that are proposed, the shrubs are are great. Another issue that came up for me today, looking at things again, was that there are only 6 trees proposed in the wetland mitigation area. This is an open area. There's hardly any grass growing there. It was an old industrial site, as you know. Um, I think that the proposed wetland mitigation area would certainly need some shade. Right now, we're looking at, according to the plan, some 4 to 6 foot trees to be planted there, including 3 red maples and 3 black gums. I would go with larger trees and perhaps more of them, especially on the south side and the southwest side. If you're going to be creating a wetland, you want some shade, and those trees will certainly not be providing shade in anytime in the near future. So I would suggest that, and also specifically a plan that shows where the trees will be planted, where the shrubs will be planted, some details in terms of the layout of the wetland mitigation area, I think would be really helpful, especially when we consider shade for the future wetland that's proposed. And I want to add also that I think that mitigating the wetland that's proposed to be filled is a viable idea. And as I said in my initial letter, that properly designed wetland mitigation area would certainly offset the impacts for the wetland that's proposed to be filled. Especially that particular area, given the fact that it's surrounded by pines and really lacks a lot of diversity. I do want to say that, I think Mr. Logan said that there was maybe 6 inches of water in that area, but I was out there today and I was crawling on logs to keep my feet dry, and the Davison report said it's up to 3 feet deep, and I think it's certainly a lot deeper than 6 inches. And that I would look to see a plan that shows, at least a couple of feet of water in there seasonally in a future mitigation area. Another thing that I was looking at again, and that I commented on, is that the proposed plans don't have a detailed erosion and sedimentation control plan. There is a very nice detail sheet on the plans that are in conformance. They cite conformance with the state guidelines for erosion and sedimentation control, but there aren't any control plans shown on the proposed plans. Mr. Logan does show hay bales and silt fence in and along his excavation area for the mitigation, which I think is very good, but site-wide, there doesn't seem to be E&S plans shown. I think there should be more effort put into, laying out exactly where E&S plans are going to be. And with regard to that, oftentimes if there's going to be excavation, typically we show soil stockpile areas within the regulated area and on site plans. And in this case, certainly when we're going industrial to residential, we're going to be experiencing some building demolition on this site. There are going to need to be stockpile areas for demolition material and materials being trucked in and out of the site. And again, as I alluded to in my earlier letter, we have unknown environmental conditions out at the site. They may be very minimal, but it doesn't sound like they've necessarily been addressed. It's possible that, lead paint from buildings or other contaminants on the site that did generate hazardous waste. There may be issues with investigating, stockpiling, managing, contaminated materials, within the regulated area. And those areas I think should be enumerated onto a plan. So we know what we're getting our arms around before we, take buildings down and start excavating soil. It's a little bit of an unknown on this site. I don't think that it's been really laid out in terms of what we might encounter on this property. I know it was marine science and it wasn't heavy industry. Doesn't look like they've done heavy boat maintenance or that sort of thing. I observed a heating oil tank floating on water within its containment on the site today. So there's a potential for contamination on the site, and those materials need to be managed properly, and they may need to be managed within the regulated area. And so those sort of things need to be taken into consideration with regard to this plan. I think those are really all the comments I have tonight.
Thank you. I guess what I want to do now is have the applicant respond to any of the issues, if they want to, that Mr. Brogy just raised with regard to, it sounds like he raised some issues that he didn't see on the plans and he would like to see on the plans. I don't know if that's new information for the applicant or if that is something they want to respond to, or if they'd rather shelve that until the next public hearing to give them adequate time to talk to Mr. Brogy and respond.
I think, both things. I think that, if Mr. Logan has something to which he'd like to respond, that he can go ahead and do that, and then we'll come back with something more concentrated.
That is perfectly fair, Mr. Logan.
Yes, I mean, George Logan for the record. I think I agree with Mark. So it looks like I'm gonna be doing a little bit of amendment to the mitigation plan. Maybe spread it out a little more so that I can achieve the depth. Martin, I must say, when I said 6 inches that's as far as I could put that thing in. And if it's in the middle, it could be a little more, obviously. I got my feet wet and I didn't have any boots. So, and as far as putting some additional trees and putting some trees that are a little bigger caliber, so they can quickly go to shade, yeah, that's not a problem. And I will succumb to your desire, sir, because here's what happens. I typically don't tell you where the plants are gonna go. Because as I said in my report, I like to, when I have boots on the ground, I can figure out where things are on that particular day. And I have this thing in my mind as to where I want to see things. I did a wetland plan mitigation yesterday, and that's exactly what I did. I'm like, okay, this looks like a good place for this tree based on the hydrology, etc. But I can certainly do that. That doesn't take too much time. And if, I can say, okay, this is what we're gonna do. And if during the implementation, I'm like, well, maybe I can push this a little bit this way and put that one a little bit back, then everyone will be happy. I think we can do that. So I will attempt to do that for you the next time.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I beg your pardon. I just wanted to also indicate that Barbara Comstock from Agent Land Development, our landscape architects, is our, I don't know which verb I need, in the room electronically. I don't know if she wanted to participate at this time, or if we just regroup on the issue of the landscaping, given the modifications and Mr. Brogy's comments.
That makes sense to me. If that's all right with you, then that's fine.
Fine.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Ms. Martin, I do have a couple questions for you. the question relates to the questions that I have for the applicant with regard to sort of the time frame of when are we going to, this is again, this is based upon where we are, the pitch to us is we're getting rid of a known entity. And we are establishing, swapping in for it, an unknown entity that we think is gonna be better, right? That's the elevator pitch for this, as it appears to me. What time frame do you think we'll need to know if that plan is working? And what are our options within that time frame to ensure that plan does work? Because, I'm always a little bit reluctant to give up something that we know we have for something that we hope is gonna work. So how long will we know if this is working or not? And if it's not working, what are our options? Because we've already filled in the one wetland. So what are our options here?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I was a host on with some environmental science students at Southern Connecticut State last night, and they asked the very same question. And typically wetland restoration plans have a 3 to 5 year monitoring period in which we would go back and replace plants if they're failing, etc. What's particularly perhaps challenging about this side is that the perimeter soils are very, very well drained. This is really, really sandy soil, which lent to my early concern about using just surface water infiltration and rainwater to supply these wetlands, and leads to my concern about let's make sure we intercept the groundwater table over a significant area, so we can ensure that this wetland's actually going to be viable. And I feel that if we do intercept the water table over uh, uh, a significant area and confirm that it's there and put down the materials that Mr. Logan is talking about, come up with a planting plan that provides shading and the diversity of species that are proposed, I think it would work. And I don't take these things lightly, certainly. Again, I was out there today and I was looking at the existing wetland, and gosh, there's not a lot going on down there other than, coming back to the fact that, this is a freshwater supply source for wildlife in the area. It's not working to provide moisture for wetland dependent plants, by any means. And I actually thought, like, gosh, is this actually tidal wetlands? Is this influenced by salt water? But it's fresh water. And I won't tell you how I know, but it's fresh water, and it's important. And so I think that if we can come up, and there's plenty of room on that northern end of the site between the next house, there's plenty of room to widen this area, to perhaps bench it down and create an open water area, and to plant some significant trees. And I've worked with this client before, as you know, and I think we can put in some significant trees and provide shade early, and make a very nice wetland that's actually near the tidal wetland and create some diversity. I think it's an opportunity. I think it can work, and it just needs some redesign.
And you mentioned that the typical time frame, I think you said 3 to 4 years for a wetland restoration. Is it any different of a timeline for a wetland creation? Because we're taking an area that isn't a wetland, we're creating a new wetland there. Does that shift that time frame forward or backward?
No, I consider both of them the same in terms of
Okay.
monitoring and success.
Thank you, that's all I have. Anyone else? Okay.
Just one other question. You mentioned that you know it's fresh water. Okay,
He said he wasn't gonna tell the secret.
I think I know the secret.
I had to know. I tasted it. It's fresh.
Oh, okay. You didn't take a conductivity reading or anything like that?
No, that was my fallback. I'm like, there could be some salinity in here. You know, I don't have a salinity meter. I have a water quality meter. It doesn't measure salinity. But I think that, you know, if there was some salinity in here, that might explain the lack of freshwater herbaceous vegetation. I'm sure George would agree.
Mhm. Okay. Anyone else from the commission for Ms. Ruggie? Okay. And thank you very much, sir.
My pleasure.
For the applicant, other than the landscape architect, who I think we're gonna take up next time after the plans are fleshed out of it, is there anyone else from the applicant who would have heard?
No, thank you.
Okay, all right, very good. So we will now move to questions from the public. I will start with the online folks. We're always waiting so intensely towards the end. Is there anyone online who wants to wave their virtual hand and be heard? Going once? Oh, we got somebody. Yes.
Hi, can you hear me?
Ruth Adio?
Yes, it's Ruth and Edward Adio.
Yes.
I'm
We can hear
just
you.
curious, and I'm not an engineer or a soil engineer. Where does the waste go from the 5 houses?
The applicant.
Do you hear me?
Yes, we do.
Yeah.
For the record, I'm Mike Ott. I'm a licensed professional engineer and land surveyor
What-
with Summerhill Civil
what
Engineers
happened?
Land Surveyors in Madison. The,
Can you hear?
Mike, you gotta come up.
Yeah, you might have to come up towards one of the.
So they can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, the person answering your question is gonna come up to the mic. So
Okay,
bear
thank
with
you.
us. No problem. I'm talking to the robot.
Sorry.
Yeah.
So for the record, I'm Mike Ott. I'm a licensed professional engineer and land surveyor with Summerhill Civil Engineers Land Surveyors in Madison. If you look at the site development plan, which I think some of you have open, you'll see that there are individual subsurface sewage disposal systems for each of the 5 homes shown on the plan.
The subsurface sewage disposal systems, septic system.
Septic system.
Septic system.
And being in such a, I mean, it seems like there's a high water table there. It could actually leach effectively into the soil?
So where these questions are actually really not wetland questions, but I'm happy to answer them. Where the septic systems, the leaching fields are located, they're not located in areas where the water table is shallow. In fact, the soil testing we did shows that the water table is down 8 or 10 feet.
I see. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. And ma'am. All right, anybody else? I see a hand up, but I don't know if that was Phil. That's the same folks who just talked. Anybody else?
So it's up that high.
I guess so.
Going, if you could mute yourself back, that'd be great. Going once, going twice. Nobody online, okay. Yes, Chris.
Mr. Chairman, just for the record, we did receive several letters, just so that everyone knows that I did distribute them to you. Kent Weeks, Ruth and Edward Adeo, Raymond and Barbara Kosky, the Conservation Commission, Lynn Steves, W.R. Woolley, Karen and David Lyle, Carolyn, sorry, and Kathy Collins. So those all should be in your packets.
They,
Or were emailed to you if they were received this afternoon.
yep, and I see all those are also, at least a large number of them are posted on the website as well. Okay, thank you very much, Chris. All right, members of the gallery. And in the front.
Hi, my name is Carolyn Lyle. I'm one of the persons who wrote the letter with my husband. Thank you for this opportunity to address you. I live at 2C Lane, Old Saybrook and Cornhill Point. And I want to ask the commission to abide by the IWW regulations criteria for decision. And the criteria for decision that I looked at states that you shall take into consideration all relevant facts and circumstances included but not limited to impacts of the proposed regulated activity on wetlands and of the regulated area outside the area for which the activity is proposed and future activities. This is my focus, the future. associated with or reasonably related to the proposed activity, which are made inevitable by the proposed regulated activity and which may have an impact on the wetlands. The request to fill in a natural wetland, a natural ancient probably wetland, to develop it, impacts the future ability of the area to respond to the forces of sea level rise. I have not heard any data on sea level rise. And that will inevitably cause in the near future, more frequent and eventual permanent flooding. The role of wetlands and marshes in mitigating sea level rise has been studied for decades. Wetlands serve as a natural pathway for the extra water and the wave actions. This has been a scientific fact based on the 8 studies, which, by the way, our town has commissioned about threats to our coastline, including the coves. And this is since Hurricane Sandy woke us up in 2012. You can see for yourselves the impact of sea level rise, particularly at 91 Sheffield, by looking at the charts, the maps, and the presentations by many organizations. I'll name a few. Connecticut Institute for Resilience and Climate Adaptation, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, Save the Sound, and the University of Connecticut, and those are just a few. These organizations have produced sophisticated, interactive, current maps that are regularly updated. And you can look at those maps and you can look at the sea level rise to the area, specifically to 91 Sheffield. I have zoomed in on these maps. You can zoom in to 91 Sheffield. You will see that the wetland in question, this low functioning wetland, shows up on those maps. It shows up as to when they're going to be, when it will be flooded. And the expert said that there are tidal impacts to this wetland. In Old Saybrook, you can get the most recent and comprehensive data on the history and the future of sea level rise from the Old Saybrook Coastal Resilience Coalition. This is an Old Saybrook nonprofit started by Dr. Joe Russo. He's an applied meteorologist, and he was recently named to the Conservation Commission. He has a presentation that has been presented in this very room, and I don't know if any of you were here. His presentation is called Climate Change and Sea Level Rise, Local Impact. This is available for you to learn about this extremely important topic. I ask you to take the time to hear and study this presentation and all of the data that is available to you. I'm begging you to do this. I'm a resident of the town. I want to preserve this for generations. Sea level rise, right in this report of 2015. If you go back to here, it'll show you what will flood. It shows you how much sea level rise will rise within the next 25 years. We don't have 4 years to have a mitigated wetland to work. So I'm asking you, please get this information, look at the impact of sea level rise on this decision and for decisions that are going to be coming before you in the future. The future of this town and our coast rests on these smart and data-informed decisions. So I'm really begging you, please look at this data. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And as I mentioned at the outset, I will give the applicant the preference to respond either one by one as people go, or to wait until to give a global response at the end. It's really up to you, whichever one you prefer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We'll work globally.
Okay, very good. So, yes, sir.
I'm W.R. Woolley. I have lived at Shelter Cove for 32 years. And to follow up on you, I spent Storm Sandy in the second story of my townhouse unit. And I watched on the NOAA maps as the storm surge came up the coast and the storm tides came up. and that's all that scientific information, and it's very interesting. The one thing that I recall about Storm Sandy was looking out and seeing 3 to 5 foot waves over North Cove and the tidal marsh, breaking waves. And I just went, this is not good. I live in a building that is one of the higher buildings, and there's a verge that goes down. And the storm tide came up right to that verge. And that is it, that is in that is in a special hazard zone VE elevation 15 feet. And I point out that the proposed mitigation wetland is also in a special hazard zone AE elevation 11 feet. So on what one end is of Shelter Cove is high, the other next over to Coulter Street is low, and during Storm Sandy, it flooded, and that changed our how that changed the kind of flood insurance we had to have, and I can tell you the cost went up an extraordinary amount. The one thing that in all the experts' information you had, nobody talked about the fact that the proposed created wetland is right on the edge of the tidal wetland of the tidal marsh. And that's in a special flood hazard zone VE. If we have another hurricane or Storm Sandy, based on what I saw from Storm Sandy, the storm surge and the storm tide is going to wipe out this created wetland. It's just, there's no way around it. That site, the subject site was also inundated with water during Storm Sandy, because I can stand up there and I can see widely across the whole. I'm 15 feet from the tidal marsh. So I've watched it for 32 years. And although I mentioned in my memorandum for the record, I grew up on an island in a bay off of Lake Huron in Michigan. And so I'm really attuned to water levels and weather. And so it's a joy to sit out there and watch it all, except for like Hurricane Irene and Superstorm Sandy. Being a retired real estate appraiser and consultant, everything I did was aimed at, had a dollar sign in front of it. So I'm going to ask some questions about with dollar signs in front of them. I've valued and consulted on numerous developmental properties, be they residential, office, and industrial. And anytime a developer had to make changes that were regulated by town or state regulations, they had to post a bond, a performance bond. And I have seen nothing about a performance bond being posted to ensure that that this proposed mitigation wetland is properly done and taken care of. The other issue is, along this line, is that as this goes forward and units are sold, the applicant is no longer going to be involved. So in cases like that, what's been done is the cost of the wetland is either estimated or firmed up. And then and then based on the estimated cost of maintaining and caring for the created wetland, there was an annuity was created, and it paid out certain amounts, so our gentleman over here could be paid his fees. I wouldn't want an expert to go hungry. I'm partial to that. So I would ask that when the commission makes its decision, that you incorporate the need for a bond to make sure it's done right. And you would ask for an annuity to care for it into the future. Another question I have is that, so it gets created and it works and everything. What happens when there is another Storm Sandy and because of the location of the proposed wetland, that's totally wiped out, it's gone. Who pays to replace it? In cases like that, because there are proposed 5 units in there, there should be, and I asked the commission to ask their wise legal counsel, there should be verbiage in the deeds that alert the buyers of those properties that they may and possibly could be responsible for rebuilding that created wetland. I have questions about, not being an attorney, I have questions about the legal basis for the town to be able to do that. So I have one other thing, having you brought up feasibility of sales and the values. In evaluation of any kind of real estate, you take into account the physical, the functional, the legal, the financial, and the economic. And the economic is the conditions surrounding the subject property. I have concerns about the physical and functional ability of this site to be developed with 5 residences. It's just so much development in such a small area, in a small, fragile area, that I think that the developer, the buyers, and the town are going to be asking for trouble into the future. And as she spoke of, although we've got regulations today, those regulations have to take into account what's going on in the broader environment outside of it. And one last thing, relatively Hewers, Milorganite is a processed material that comes from the sewage disposal plants in Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
Okay, any other comments from the gallery? Yes, in the back. Thank you.
Do you want me to come up? I'm very loud, so I'm happy going into the back. Jennifer Lindenmeyer, I'm at 19 Saltus, which is contiguous to the Sheffield property. I am new in town and am learning. So, I've been asking a lot of people a lot of questions. My first one has to do with regulatory oversight, and it's really a structural and process question. What body, in Old Saybrook or Connecticut, considers the totality of the environmental impact of each of the elements of the application that's going on at 91 Sheffield? So we have dredging of the cove, we've got eagle nests, we have inland wetlands, we have clear cutting, and it doesn't, I don't know who looks at all of that in its totality to understand the actual environmental impact. And the thing that makes me nervous is if someone's not doing it, it has the possibility of having an exponential impact, which could be positive, could be negative, but I'm wondering who actually is looking at that. So that's one.
Well, so I can tell you that, to the extent that the question's not hypothetical, you actually want to answer.
Yeah, no, however, I
sure.
thought everyone was sort of tossing them out and
Well, I
they
can
were gonna be
only-
addressed.
Well, the question is, I can answer what this body does.
Great,
And this body deals with inland wetlands and water courses.
right,
So that is and in this case, and the upland review area of 100 feet from those inland wetlands and water
Right.
courses. That's what we look at. In this case, we're looking at the wetland that's affected by the proposed activity is this one wetland that they're proposing filling and then substituting an additional wetland.
right. I
That's what we-
actually, yeah, no, I understand
That's
that,
what we
and
look
I
at.
met with Lynette to
Okay.
get the background. But how does that feed into, how do you feed into an umbrella perspective?
We do what we do.
Let me
here.
answer this, yeah. They only have jurisdiction over what they have jurisdiction of. In order to go to zoning, they need a wetlands permit. When you talk about the totality, that isn't really something that happens, okay? There are some places, I mean, that's just the reality of it.
Yeah,
okay?
yeah, no, that's,
There's some states that have unified permits that are more of an attempt of a totality. Connecticut is not one of them. And
Okay.
so everybody has their own silo and they live in that silo. And sometimes there's overlap, sometimes they're interconnected, but for tonight, we're talking about wetlands.
I understand, but, and
Okay.
so there are, but that's helpful in that there are no connections elsewhere, so,
Well,
yeah.
the
so-
Wetlands Commission's gonna give a wetlands report
Yeah, no, I get
to the
that.
zoning commission.
And then.
But when you
the-
use the word totality, that's a big word. That means like everything, right?
Well, that's-
So
Good
that's,
question.
we
Yeah.
can only do so much, so.
Yeah.
The public hearing is for people to come and say, this is what I think about this project in the wetlands, and to provide evidence one way or the other.
Okay, great. Then my second question is an inland wetland specific question, which is, it sounds as though there's the potential for predisposition toward filling in natural inland wetlands if there can be a man-made alternative proposed. Is that what I'm hearing as a possibility?
No, I don't think-
Because it seems like this could be
I
precedent.
think the chairman's already
for-
asked questions concerning that very directly.
Well, no, but this can be precedence for what happens
No,
in subsequent
No, no.
cases.
Every
Okay.
case is unique.
Yeah,
Got
yeah,
it.
each case is unique, and I think that the Supreme Court decision that Attorney Shansky referenced in her letter indicates that we can consider the creation of a substitute wetland and filling in a wetland. That is something that we can consider. There certainly isn't a predisposition for that being something we want to see.
Right,
And it would be done on a case-by-case basis, depending upon the myriad of factors that we're going over today.
and you're not worried about precedent. So because of the case by case that this committee can,
Our decisions and applications are based on the application that is in front of us. We don't say, well, we did this over here in Cornfield Point 3 years ago. That means we have to do the same over in Knollwood now. That's not the way it works. We look at every applicant has, well, because every applicant has its own merits. Every applicant is a mosaic,
Right.
where certain factors that are present on one site are not present on another site. So there isn't really a decision in one case does not really have a precedential value in another case.
Yeah, well, that's a relief. Good. So we're not, what I'm hearing is there is no concern about precedent setting in any of these conversations.
Our decisions don't, a decision on one application does not set a precedent for a future application.
That's great. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Any other comments from the gallery? Yes, Ms. Steffen. She has recused herself and is speaking as a member of the public, or is that all right?
I have recused myself and I am speaking.
Are there any issues with this
Is
procedurally?
there someone else that you want to have speak for whoever you're gonna speak for?
I'm speaking as the president of the board of directors of Saybrook Village, the senior housing
Attorney Shansky, do
complex.
you have any comment on this?
There are statutes that control that a member of a commission, are you a member of this commission?
Yes, she is.
Cannot speak on behalf of other people in front of the commission. It's 811 in the zoning statute, 8-21 in the planning statute, and 22A, I don't know the number, in the wetlands
As
statute.
president of the board of directors, I own the complex.
That may be, but I think that what she's saying is, and I think that this may be correct, that someone can speak on behalf of your complex, but it shouldn't be you as a member of because you are a member of the commission, recuse yourself or not.
Maybe
I think
vice chairman?
And it does, and keep in mind, we are going to continue this public hearing to the next meeting, that if you want to have someone who's briefed and can do the
Okay, she
presentation,
hasn't been
that's possible.
briefed.
They can do it next month.
You can do it next month.
Want me to do it next month? Yeah, I'm the vice president.
That would be fine.
That's
So
fine.
that's fine.
So why don't we do this next month? Sorry, we don't want to paint the whole hearing here.
Right, we want it to be fair for all parties.
Okay, we'll do it next month.
Thank you. Okay. Anyone else from the gallery?
Could I make a couple more comments if nobody else?
As long as it's new. If it is new,
It is
yes,
new.
I will afford you the opportunity to briefly make a couple additional comments.
It's no.
Okay. Unless the applicant has any objection, I don't imagine.
It's new.
It's no. You probably are gonna like it.
That's fine.
In Attorney Shansky's letter dated April 15th, 2025, on page 2, first paragraph, second sentence, she said, speaking about the coastal engineering that had occupied this site, she said that business, though fronting on North Cove, was not a Walder dependent use. That's a little odd because in the 32 years I sat up and watched, they had between 1 and 3 folks in that little cut that goes out. And it was my understanding that they had those boats there and used them to calibrate their tidal, the tools they use to measure the tides with, and to test new tools to see how they fit into the program they had. That's it.
Okay, thank you. Okay, anyone else from the gallery wish to be heard tonight?
I just want to ask, can I give my statement as part of the record?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I'd like everybody to have it.
Certainly.
So you're so.
Certainly.
Is that different than the letter that's already in the
Yes, it
record?
is.
Thank you.
Yes, it is.
And then we'll, of course, get that. Anyone else from the gallery? Going once? Going twice? Okay, first of all, I want to say thank you to the applicants, to all the experts, and to all the members of the public, and to staff and council who come from a long way to be with us tonight. I've said many times, I cherish when the public comes to speak to us, because that's how we learn. So, but it's been a long meeting. We've heard a lot of comments. The applicant has a lot to get through. So I'm going to make a motion that we continue the public hearing to our next regularly scheduled meeting on Thursday, May 15th. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Thank you all very much. Drive carefully, be safe. All right, I'll let it filter out. We need, if anybody feels the restroom break before we wrap up now, we off. I can't always. Yeah. Never made that very much. Good to see you. Okay. Back on the record there.
In that area,
Okay. If the members of the public could either
Sorry, thank you.
move to the hallway or
Yep.
there.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Move to the hallway or there. That means you. You're included in that. Whoever you are, come on. Okay. Okay. So you can stay. You just have to. Quiet. Okay. Appreciate it. Okay. Moving on to our regular business. We have the minutes of our February meeting. March was canceled. Has anybody had a chance to review those minutes?
Yeah.
Any edits or changes? No? Hearing none, I move that we accept the minutes as presented.
Second.
All in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? Hearing none, minutes are approved. All right, moving on now. Committee representative and staff reports. Chris sitting in here for our special staff report. Anything from you?
Nothing really. I think we had enough of reporting for tonight, unless you have a question for me.
I think you may be correct. Yes, sir.
Take it that you'll take up, we have a memo in the file on this, for conservation.
Yes, we do.
That'll be dealt with when we,
Sure, in deliberations.
Okay.
In deliberations, I mean, unless somebody from conservation wants to be heard.
okay.
We'll take it
There
up.
was a member, so, but we're out of the public hearing, so we really can't talk about it. That's why I read your record,
Okay.
all the letters into the record so that you know that they were received,
Very good.
even if you don't read them out loud.
Okay, I see in terms of, we have, what looks like a new primer here.
Yeah, so the Connecticut Bar Association just had their legal seminar. So typically what we do is if there's something new and it pertains to you, we copy it. Before reading.
Excellent, I'll add it to the book. All right, and that is it. Anything else from anybody? All right, hearing nothing, move to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor? All right, thanks, everybody.